Good evening, everyone. I'm Charles Panning. It was yet another record day on Wall Street. The Dow, the S&P 500, the NASDAQ, and the Russell 2000 all closing at new lifetime highs. In fact, shattering the old records. The Trump rally steams right along. Joining me right out the gate to discuss, Paul Dietrich, along with Steve Cortes. Steve, you're very close to the Trump team. I got to believe everyone is elated about this. It certainly has defied the naysayers.
Right. And, you know, Charles, absolutely. We have defied expectations. We've defied conventional wisdom. We certainly did as a campaign for a heck of a long time. And now he has as president-elect, because it was widely assumed on Wall Street that if he did somehow pull off this upset, that global markets would go into a cataclysm. And instead, we see quite the opposite. You're exactly right. All three indices at new all-time highs. What I'm most excited about, Charles, putting my partisan hat aside, just as an American and as a market participant, is the fact that small caps are leading the rally. So we got the S&P 500 and NASDAQ to new records just today. Small caps blew that away last week. And why? Because it's America first. Not just America first in terms of policy, but also in terms of investing. Small caps tend to be much more domestic in orientation, and capital right now is voting with its feet, heading into small caps and voting into America first.
Yeah, we're also seeing where consumer discretionary stocks are starting to outpace the consumer staples, which was defensive earlier this year. Utility stocks were up 21%. Now they're up 7%, Paul. I mean, it's obvious that people are moving out of these areas where they were sort of camping out, a little bit afraid, lack of direction, and they're pouring money into areas that they think are going to really work out.
Well, you look at the policies that Trump is talking about, and I've been talking to friends over at the transition team at Trump Tower, and they believe that within the first 100 days, they've got 3 economic proposals that they're going to implement, and that these proposals will add one.
What are the proposals?
Well, the proposals are one, the tax cuts for both personal and corporations.
Same time, they push them through.
Same thing, and also the big one, getting 10% tax for profits coming back. The second thing is they've got a long list of regulations, expensive regulations, and executive
I read somewhere
orders.
They can knock off $40 billion in these regs right out the gate.
That's what they're planning to do. But the big one is infrastructure spending. And they're talking about, I've been reading $550 billion. They're talking about $1 trillion.
$1 trillion over 10 years.
Over 10 years. It's going to be paid for with private investment, tax credits, and infrastructure bonds. They believe that will add 3.3 million people, new jobs, to the job rolls. They believe it will create $4 trillion in productivity increases. And if you think about it, we've got a mediocre growth of 2% in the GDP right now. This would bring us up to 3.5% to 4% growth, which is, you know, kind of JFK and Reagan years growth.
Right.
This is going to be spectacular for the stock market. It's going to be spectacular for wages. And that's why people are moving into things like consumer discretionary savings.
You know, Steve, here's the thing. I understand they're excited, obviously, at Trump Tower. But what I'm seeing, and it's somewhat anecdotal, but I'm seeing it, are people who did not vote for Donald Trump, the guy who works at the parking garage, the Uber driver, you know, whoever it is, they're saying they feel something, they see something. And in my mind, I've always said that to have true economic success, everyone's got to buy in. It looks like everyone's buying in.
Charles, I think you're exactly right, and I know it is anecdotal. We can't really put data on it, but it's important. Animal spirits drive the economy. It's largely a confidence game. You know, it really is. So while I think the policies are incredibly important that are coming out of Trump Tower and will be coming out of the Trump White House, I think just as important is the renewed belief in America. We're coming out of a decade of economic malaise, and to be bipartisan in my criticism, not just President Obama, President Bush as well. Most Americans haven't had a pay raise since the year 2000. That's pathetic. We're better than that as a country, and I think people are starting to believe that. So Donald Trump, it's not just policy. That's incredibly important, but it's also the belief that we can and will do better. It convinces people to take risks. It convinces them to hire. I really just can't be optimistic enough about what the future holds for us economically.
You know, it's also interesting. I mean, I've also seen, guys, signs of this turn even before the election. You know, you saw wages finally last year turn around. But consumer confidence, the production numbers, mining, some of these areas, I'm starting to see them. And you got to believe that that's a baton that Donald Trump can grab and run with. But there are naysayers. What do you say about the naysayers who say, okay, the Trump deficit is going to kill all of this stuff? that interest rates are going to go up, inflation is going to go up, and we're going to end up with no economic growth, Paul?
Well, if you look at the proposals, some of them are tax credits. That won't affect the deficit. Some of them are private investments. The infrastructure bonds, that will increase the deficit. But if you look at what we're going to be doing, the productivity gains, they believe that will offset. There's another thing, too, is that their tax reform proposals, there are two ways to do tax reform, like Reagan and JFK did, or like Bush did. Bush, he just lowered taxes but did no tax reform, and so we just had lower revenues. We're talking here about tax reform where corporations like Microsoft and Apple that are paying 3% marginal tax rates, they're going to pay more. So this is going to increase money into the coffers of the government.
Right. And that mitigates to a degree the debt/deficit argument. Steve, you know, one thing that you have been concerned about, and I myself also, the potential trade war. We saw where Ford said, listen, we're not going to move certain manufacturing jobs from Kentucky to Mexico, but they still plan to move a big chunk of work down there. Let's say production. I think work is the wrong word. Production. Small car production, but they vowed not to sort of upset the apple cart. In other words, workers in America will still continue to work. Is that an area where you think Donald Trump's going to back off? Or are you like me? I see signs that Mexico and at least Canada are going to blink very quickly.
Well, you know, Charles, I think they will because they have to. And I think what Trump said during the campaign is very accurate. We act like we have a strong hand when, in fact, we hold all the cards. Now, look, no one wants a trade war. We are in favor of trade. It has to be fair. There has to be reciprocity. But I think in the end, whether it's Mexico, Canada, you know, friendly countries to us, or China, maybe not so friendly, all of the above, they're going to have to blink because they need us far, far more than we need them. We need each other, but it's not an equal partnership. Thank goodness. We hold the cards. And so I think, too, what's important here is interest rates, and you're right, we have to be careful about the deficit. Interest rates have risen dramatically since the election. So far, I think that's a very good thing. It's because the bond market believes in growth. It believes that there won't be a trade war. It's just going to be sustained American growth. I think that's where we will end up. I think markets are pricing it pretty correctly.